Good afternoon and welcome to this last event of the 8th European Congress of Mathematics. One of its highlights, it will consist in a live interview of Professor Pierre Bourguignon by Professor Günther Ziegler, and I am very honored to chair it. Günther Ziegler is Professor of Mathematics at Freie University in Berlin and currently is president. His work connects combinatorics and discrete geometry with topology and optimization. His honors include the Leibniz Prize, Communicator Award, Berlin Science Prize, and the Steele Prize for Mathematical Exposition. He's member of several academies, like the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences, the German National Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina, and the National Academy of Science and Technology. And he's a fellow of the American Mathematical Society. From 2006 to 2008, he was president of the German Math Society, and he's currently member of the executive board of the International Mathematical Union. Last but not least, Professor Ziegler is very well known for his very active and successful involvement in raising awareness for mathematics. Now, about the subject of the interview, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, he's a differential geometer, and his work has focused on the study of Ricci curvature and its relation with differential geometry and general relativity. For most of his career, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon was a researcher at CNRS in France, and from 1994 to 2013, he was director of the very prestigious Institut des Études Scientifiques, the Hautes Études Scientifiques near Paris. As president of the French Math Society from 1990 to 92, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon was very instrumental in shaping the new European Mathematical Society, which was established in 1990. He was actually the second president of the EMS, and among other things, during his presidency of the EMS, the journal GEMS was founded. He's member of the Academia Europea and also foreign member of the Royal Spanish Academy of Sciences. He has been member of a very large number of scientific and advisory boards. He has got honorary doctorates, honorary memberships. It's impossible to list all that here. But let me just say that he got the Paul Langevin Prize, the prize of the Rayonnement Français and Maths and Physics of the French Academy of Sciences, and in 2000 he was made Knight of the French Merit Order. As you all know, since 2014, as a huge service to the European science and research community, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon has been president of the European Research Council. Let me finish by saying that, in my opinion, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon has been one of the greatest ambassadors of mathematics and of science in general in the French and in the European societies. A unique success case, success story, in bridging scientific research, politicians, and decision makers. Günther, you can take over now. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Maria. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you here, Jean-Pierre. And I'm very happy that we can have this conversation. I first thought I would start with asking you for one or two facts about you that Maria doesn't know and that are not in the official biography, but perhaps we will leave that for the end of the interview and rather go to sort of mathematics and organizations and all that. So we have nearly 1.5 hours time, and the idea was that we would, for the first part, try and pick on your perspective on mathematics and things sort of from the European Mathematical Society. So European Mathematical Society was founded in 1990. Friedrich Hirzebruch was the first president. You were the second one. In your paper, Taking the Long View, which was published, I guess, last year for the 30th anniversary, you report that the context of founding the European Mathematical Society was the Cold War and the tensions between East and West that were very apparent. Perhaps you can tell us how at the ICM in Helsinki in '78 and in Warsaw in 1982. So what was this at that time, and what does it mean for the European Mathematical Society today? I mean, there's tensions again between East and West that one has to live with. And I mean, you've been doing now interactions between science and politics in the last years.
Thank you for this introduction. Indeed, the birth of the European Mathematical Society, which go back to the 70s, was definitely very much marked by efforts by scientists, particularly European scientists, to really overcome divisions, which were at that time really very much based on politics. And in particular, the difficulty for a number of our colleagues from Eastern countries in the Soviet Union at that time to really exchange in an open way with scientists, mathematicians in particular, from the West. There have been a few attempts to overcome this, and I think we should really congratulate the colleagues who have been contributing to this through the Banach Center, for example, or the IASA structure in Luxembourg, near Vienna, in Austria, and a few others, because there were definitely places where it was definitely possible for scientists from both sides to, in particular mathematicians, to meet. So I think at that time, definitely we felt, many people felt, and Sir Michael Atiyah in particular felt, because he was really one of the people who really pushed for that. But also, I would like to also mention the remarkable effort by our colleagues from Finland, because I think one thing which is not so well known is that the Finnish Mathematical Society is the oldest in Europe. So I think we should keep this in mind, that our Finnish colleagues have been really at the forefront. And so that was the objective of the creation. I mean, which led to the creation of the European Mathematical Society, was to overcome this division. When actually the society was created in 1990, actually it was after 1989, that is after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and really the fact that the division was really more or less stopped. And the trace of the division before was definitely, as I mentioned, difficulty to move from one side to the other. And in Helsinki, for example, the fact that Professor Margulis could not come to get the Fields Medal that, of course, he should have received, highly deserved, and so on and so forth. And it's true that, as you know, that because of the emergency state in Warsaw in 1982, the Congress couldn't be held. It was postponed by a year, but there was still a meeting of the General Assembly of the International Mathematical Union, which I must say was really very tense. So I don't think the situation today is different. Some people want to push us in the idea that the world should be divided into groups. I don't believe in this, and I think we as scientists have to insist a lot that international cooperation is absolutely fundamental for science to thrive at international level. And therefore all the exchanges which have taken place and really mutual training that we have been going through really have to continue being developed. And I think that's the way I see the future. And therefore, continental organizations such that the European Mathematical Society should be thriving and really, for the moment, not too much worried about this. And I hope we can contribute to this to continue to be what we wanted it to be, namely an open space.
I understand that at the time it was sort of unclear what the European Mathematical Society should be or wanted to be, in the sense that there was this concept of this society of societies, just as a framework around the national societies, and there was this other concept that said this should be a society of individual members and sort of get everybody from Europe together. And apparently that was not resolved at the time, but one made a compromise, right?
Yes, I think we should always consider that having compromise is not necessarily a bad thing. So I think, first of all, because it helps you get out of a trap, which I think was very important. Actually, it really corresponded at that time. And actually, today, it's even, in a sense, it was some kind of premonitory, the fact that there are different conceptions on the Western side about what Europe should be. And definitely there were a number of countries, but in particular individual people who thought that at some stage Europe should get more united. And therefore, the people who should be members of the European Mathematical Society should be the mathematicians themselves. Some others thought that the national structures should still be dominating. One of the difficulties with the national structures is that the way they are constituted, the way they act, their level of activity varies a lot from one country to the other. And therefore, it's not so obvious how you can really get them to work together. But the compromise was to say, well, why, since there are these two conceptions, why don't we try and get them to work? And actually, I think this has proved useful. I know the successive presidents of the European Mathematical Society have been organizing meetings of presidents of the national societies. But at the same time, a number of scientists, in particular young ones, and I'm not sure it's a good idea, but nevertheless, that's what they do. They become member of the European Math Society without being members of the national society. So I think it shows that the possibility of having the two formats work together without one really harming or making big damage to the other. So altogether, I find this compromise, and I must say somebody who played a very key role in setting up the compromise was Friedrich Hirzebruch. And we have to be grateful to him for many things, but this one in particular. And I still remember this very tough discussion one evening, the first evening of the meeting in Medralin, and quite heroic attitude of Friedrich Hirzebruch, Fritz, as we used to call him, to really tell people, sorry, but we have to get out of this mess.
It seems that Fritz Hirzebruch was a great diplomat in various ways, and diplomats are needed. And if we sort of try and also get mathematics organized and in bringing people and societies together in this situation. So of course the question, what's the right structure and how do you want to get people together could be seen through what do we really want to achieve. And that's, again, I think European Mathematical Society wants to achieve different things. One of them is to bring people together, for example, on congresses like this one, which unfortunately had to be reorganized in a virtual format. So I guess meetings are still important and will be important, and physical meetings will be important, at least after the pandemic dies down. Or do you think that this is the break where we get into virtual meetings and that's how we do it?
No, I don't believe that at all. I think many of us, me in particular, but I'm sure many of us know how much meeting people made a difference in their scientific life, because there is a level of interaction that you can achieve by meeting people and actually coming back to them a few minutes later because you thought something you said was not exactly straight and you wanted more and so on. And I must say we should be extremely grateful to our Slovenian colleagues for all the efforts they made to put it together. A Congress, very attractive one. Then they had to postpone it. And then even the final version was partly on site and partly virtual. So I think we, in particular, since Slovenia is not a huge country, so it meant a fantastic mobilization of all colleagues there. But I really believe that, of course, the new opportunity is, of course, to attend meetings everywhere in the world at some moment. And I must say, just because I happen to have met some people in Brazil last year during the time the year before, 2019, at the moment where we could travel. I really enjoyed very much meetings of actually mostly economists who invited me to take part in their meetings taking place in Brazil virtually. So I think we probably will gain this something from this, but I don't think we should, in particular for the younger generation, just renounce of having physical meetings, because I think also for when you teach, I think it's not the same. Recently, I've not been teaching. I'm retired from that point of view, but I think it's extremely important for students to have a possibility of a very direct, simple interaction with the teachers and also with their peers. I mean, it's there is a community which is built. You don't build communities in the same way in a virtual world. So I think probably we will have to learn to get the most out of the two worlds. But I still believe in very direct personal contact. In particular, one dimension which is for me fundamental, and had the privilege because of the functions I had to travel the world, to really understand better, in a sense, traditions, to understand better different cultures. And you cannot do that at a distance. You have to be embedded into it. You have to be interactive with people. And I think this is something which must be preserved by all means. And this exposure to different ways of living, different cultures, requires really exposure.
But it means that what we mean by interacting, what we mean by learning from each other, what we mean by coming together changes, has new opportunities. It definitely also changes the community. Yeah,
no, maybe one thing in particular in my recent functions, I've been pushing, because when you are confronted with the policymakers, what they are interested in is very often structures. And for me, what is really most interesting are people. And so to bring back the fact that you need people to be involved, you need the diversity of people to be respected, you need the diversity of people to be instrumentalized, that is to get advantage of the input that people give just because of their own history or their own vision, which of course at some point structures help or create handicaps, but I think what makes a difference are people.
Absolutely. I just thought whether you would phrase this differently if you were an algebraist, so talking about structures that way and other things being more important, but perhaps that's not our topic for right now. If we look at the sort of agenda of the European Mathematical Society, then it also says that one of the purposes is assisting and advising on problems of mathematical education. Is that depending on what we mean by education, of course, is that something that mathematical societies can deliver? Is that something that, I don't know, European Mathematical Society could or should focus on? Is that something that's happening? Or is that what we dream of and in the end never get around to do in terms of sort of agenda of a society?
I think the formulation which is in the statute of the European Mathematical Society is very careful on that. It's really to contribute and really, so on this, the present situation, as you know, is a remarkable diversity from one country to the next, which very often has a long history. There is a tradition in many countries, and the way mathematical teaching is approached is quite different from one country to the next. By the way, if you look at the formal structure of the European Union, education is not a shared responsibility. So the European Commission cannot really do much there without the Council, that is the countries, asking the Commission to do. But spontaneously, it has no right to do anything. So one thing that the European Commission has done quite well, I think, was the setting up of the Erasmus program, and which really, again, we are talking about people, that is making it easier and to support the possibility for young people to travel, be exposed to another culture, another system. So coming back to your very specific question, I think the general tendency in recent years, unfortunately, has been in many Western countries, in particular European countries, some kind of diminishing of the role of mathematical training in the general education. And this is, of course, something you don't see in an Asian country at the moment. And so I think this is something on which we need to reflect, because it's quite clear that for the workforce of the 21st century, having a basic understanding of mathematics and mathematics, I should say mathematical sciences, is very important, because one has to include statistics, for example, in it in a very definite way. And therefore, I think it is very important that professional mathematicians, as we are, really show interest, curiosity, and are willing to make efforts to really make the value and also the way mathematics contributes to society altogether as visible as possible. Because very often the teaching, and the more you reduce it, the more it is true, of mathematics doesn't give any possibility for young people to get any hint of what really mathematics is about. And I know that you personally have made remarkable efforts to that. I personally made some efforts, not as big as yours, but I think we have to take any possible mean to do that. And in particular, all the modern means. And I know that some people have been remarkably creative. And I think we need to be creative about that. So I think this is where we are at the moment. But maybe one of the key components, which I would like to stress, because, and by giving one example, by the way, of a country which I think made a fantastic progress in this respect, the key element are the teachers. So I think the teacher training and teacher continuous training is absolutely fundamental. And in many countries, in particular in my own country, France, at the moment, this is not something which is taken sufficiently seriously. And at the moment, also partly because the market for jobs, for people having a good training in math is very hot. And being a teacher is tough. You're not well paid. And I mean, taking care of a classroom is not easy. And so therefore, at the moment, what we face is that actually there are more positions available than there are people applying, which we know the result is that the tendency will certainly be a lowering of the quality. And I think this has to be understood as a real challenge. So the country I wanted to quote on this is South Korea. You probably, maybe you don't know that the first PhD thesis in mathematics in Korea was in 1947. And the effort of the country over 60 years to give absolute top priority to education makes Korea at the moment, South Korea at the moment, really one of the countries in the world with the highest proportion of an age group, I mean, of the new generation in tertiary education. And so it's a complete transformation through a huge effort by the whole society. And this has produced remarkable effects. Because we have seen the improvement of the quality of the technical level of the country, remarkable transformation over time. And so it shows that giving priority to education over a long period of time can really make a huge difference and transform a society into one of the leading society worldwide. So I think, and again, in the case of South Korea, it's not because they exploited the oil or gas or anything. It's just hard work and education. So I think we must learn from this. And part of it, of course, is the high respect given to teachers. And I think this is one thing which our societies need to preserve if it's not yet destroyed or rebuilt in case it has been partially lost. And I think that's something extremely important. So as mathematicians, I think we have to contribute to that. And not specifically for math teachers, although because of what I said about the job market, they tend to be difficult to find because they are offered other possibilities. And it's good that they offered possibilities. I'm not against it. I'm just saying it makes the effort in this for this category of people even more difficult to achieve.
Of course, it may be frustrating if in 2021, on the one hand, we have to argue about the importance of mathematics and about the importance of teachers and all that. But I remember from the Congress in Seoul that indeed this Korean story is a model for how also government priorities and priorities of a society really change things and give development and strength and wealth and everything that comes from it. I mean, of course, frustrating if we're in 2021 and have to explain to people that exponential functions are important, that statistics are important. I mean, one could, you know, I mean, we're in the second year of the pandemic and people still don't see that math is everywhere. But indeed, I mean, what you outlined is that these EMS priorities of assisting and advising of problems of mathematical education, I think that's, I mean, we have to stress this whole thing because it hasn't sunk in. And I mean, what you describe in the European scale, that the European Union doesn't have the power to really work on education. We have the same thing in Germany, where the federal government doesn't have the power, and still one has to get the general message through. Let me switch to a little bit a different topic, but which again is EMS agenda, namely the question of one of the pieces of wealth that we have in mathematics, which is the publications, the libraries, the sort of preserving the knowledge that then in the end is used. And Maria mentioned that GEMS, the Journal of the European Math Society, was started out under your presidency. That's sort of one of the agenda points. In some sense, it's a classical math journal. Another agenda point was under your presidency again was a digital mathematical library. I understand that that's one thing that Peter Michor, as the secretary at the time, was pushing. And a third agenda point at the time was the Zentralblatt, which was more or less in danger of being lost completely. Some of these things thrive now. What was the perspective then? Where were your priorities?
Well, maybe let me approach this by first recalling the extraordinary transformation that we have seen since then. So remember, you're talking of the mid-90s, where it was clear that digitalization was on the horizon. It was not yet there fully. And so therefore, I think one thing which we have to acknowledge is that, of course, the circulation of information has changed drastically from these times. So I think this is the first point. The second point was, of course, I think Maria has been very generous in saying something which is true, which is under my presidency, that the journal was created. But of course, it was conceived under Fritz Erzebo and his executive committee before. So it was not something we created out of nothing. It was already in the making. So that's of course and for mathematicians, so just to connect with this extraordinary transformation, the danger of the extraordinary transformation that it, in a sense, today it's so easy to circulate mathematics with mathematical text, mathematical documents which are not yet fully ripe. And I think one thing which the scarcity or the difficulty of publishing made necessary, and that was really the philosophy at the time, was really you would not publish something until you really had thought about it in depth. And so the danger of this facility, of this easiness of distributing or circulating documents, is also that it tends to generate a huge amount of documents, and an amount which is so big that actually you cannot read everything. I try myself every morning to connect to Archive and see what is new in my area. Of course, there are all kinds of things, maybe some things which don't interest me, but I think we have to be very careful not to be flooded by too many articles which have not yet been really checked. That's why defending the quality of publication is very important. And then, of course, then you end up with the difficulty, what is the best way of doing this, knowing that we have this new capacity, and knowing also that there's at the same time, an economical problem that if you want to really be sure that you have the quality checked, you don't want this to become some kind of a way of making money. So the two things are very difficult to separate. And that's the third point I want to make. That is this issue about articles, journals, and so on. We must, as scientists, make sure we manage to separate the part which is the science and the part which is an economical problem. And it's very hard because you need the appropriate structures to do that. Some societies have done that remarkably well. I must say at the European level, the LMS has been leading and able to produce at low cost remarkable mathematical text. The French Math Society has been struggling with this, and still I think is producing good documents, but at some point it was really threatening the financial soundness of the society. So I think we have to recognize that there are these two dimensions. One which is a purely scientific one, for which I think we need to make sure that we don't waste time in reading papers which have not been really matured. And this you need filters. So maybe the filter is in the training. That is, when you train somebody, you should train the person that unless you really have tested your text on some people, maybe you don't circulate it too widely. And the other part, which is the economical one, that is to find a system in which really we are not hostage of companies who just take advantage of the new system to make more money. And although we have to recognize that to have a good system, still you need some money. So the economical problem is not one which is invented. It exists, but we have to be clever and creative about this. And so I'm very pleased to see that the EMS is moving into a system which I find quite good, which really is combining the two possibilities, that is the possibilities of really still having journals which are really of high quality and still making them available, in particular for colleagues who don't have high resources. So I think this is the difficulty for this. Of course, we have to be careful that as mathematicians, we stress a lot, and in particular, if you are a theoretical mathematician, we stress a lot the importance of written document. But of course, for some people doing mathematics in a different way, software can be as important as an article, or data could be extremely important. For statisticians, access to data and well-structured data are absolutely fundamental. So I think we, as a community, we have to be sure that we are not exclusive and focus too much our attention to a very classical way of doing mathematics. But again, from that point of view, using the expression mathematical sciences is very important, that to be inclusive and really in terms of productions, that we don't limit the production of mathematics to the most classical one. But I think we should never forget that these new possibilities, which are fantastic, and really, anytime you prepare a lecture, which still happens to me from time to time, you notice that even if articles you want to access are not immediately accessible, if you write to a colleague saying, I want to have access within 1 day or 2 days, you have access to it. You imagine before, it was not like this at all. So these are fantastic possibilities, but we have to be careful not to spoil them and to transform them into a system in which we, as I said, we could be flooded by low quality articles, and then you at some point stop even looking at them because you have the feeling you waste your time. So I think this idea that as a community, we have to be very responsible and train the next generation to be very demanding on the quality of what one produces is really, really important.
And the scenery, the way you've sketched it, has so many components, and I think any single one of these components has changed a lot over the last 40 years. I mean, starting from how easy it is to write papers and what the community is about and the standards are about, when do you release a preprint and let people see it, to all these questions of what does publishing mean, and then the economics of publishing and the economics of making things accessible, and then the question about what are the things. You mentioned that the data that belong to research have grown in a role that they just didn't have 30 years ago. And I mean, since everything is so dynamic, I guess it also means there's no single solution for how to organize research, how to do the quality control. I mean, the one thing is, I think that we as a community have the responsibility still for directing these things, educating ourselves, setting the standards for what should be published and what should not be published, and how things should be communicated. And then on the other hand, there is these billion-euro corporations who assist publishing, assist distributing, preserving things. And on the other hand, of course, we are fighting with as a community. And the one thing I observe is that also there, the business models change, and they used to be printing journals and shipping them and getting money for that. And then they went into getting fees for making things accessible in the internet. And we're moving into open access, and there the next move might be that they try and get hold of the data, and where the real business is to get us, sort of tell us where to look for the research we need, because the jungle got so huge and so hard to overlook. And that's exactly this. There's so many preprints, it's hard to skim them. There's so many publications. Question is, can we hold the data with us? Can we keep the overview, or are others going to do that for us?
Well, I think you are touching a very important issue. Actually, if you look at the community, mathematical community as a whole, I think it is, I mean, what the people are producing varies depending on what you are doing as research. But still, I mean, one thing we should remember, which we tend to forget from time to time, altogether, we are not such a large community. I mean, there are communities which are much larger than us, and communities for which the amount of data they are collecting, but they are collecting these data because they are vital for them, is much larger. So in the sense, the data in mathematics, I think altogether is still will probably remain a smaller market, if you allow me to use this word, than for other communities. One thing I didn't touch, and you mentioned it in passing, but I think it was very important, which also shows how the community function. We have, as a mathematical community, these very, very special databases, which is Central Blatt Math on one hand, and MathSciNet on the other side of the Atlantic. And the fact that these things exist, you see, show something about, it has to do with so articles published get commented, and we hope they are really commented. It's not just an copy paste of part of the article, which is something of remarkable value when it's done right. And that's why when I was president, for sure, this is one issue, because at that time, Central Blatt was close to collapsing for financial reasons. And I must say that the efforts by the colleagues from the academy in Heidelberg, but also the willingness of Springer to help at that time. So the fact that the EMS, the European Mathematical Society, joined was actually important, because it showed that we cared for this. And as you know, the two fantastic databases, I mean, Central Blatt Math and MathSciNet, have the same creator, who is Professor Neugebauer, who left Germany for reasons we know very well, and he escaped. And so I think before the war. And so it's interesting that these two things now both exist. Actually, the existence of two similar structures looked like a waste, but actually it pushed each one of them to be more creative, to be more dynamic. And I think altogether it improved the services. So now the key point is to know whether we can afford collectively at the world level to have these two things. It looks like it's the case. And in particular, the recent decision by German authorities to make Central Batmat fully public is great. I mean, I'm extremely grateful, but it shows that all the efforts which have gone into defending it, nurturing it, improving it, have been worthwhile, because now Europe is in a sense leading. As you know, I mean, MathSciNet is still a very good source of money for the American Math Society. If you look at the accounts, it's a very significant source of money. So I think it shows that in terms of open science, Europe is able to, and our community in particular, is able to lead the way. And again, this is possible partly, as I said, because our community is still not so big. We're talking about 100,000 people, about not millions of people. So I think probably for millions of people it would not be feasible. So still, you see that it's connected to our own community as it is.
But 100,000 research mathematicians is already a huge community. You can't get them on a conference, even on Zoom. I was struck by that sort of in the same sentence you connected community on the one side and then open science. And I think this is two values or two principles that also a society like European Mathematical Society has to foster and has to try and bring together. And I think there's jeopardy or attacks on or difficulties with keeping community, and open science of course also has attacks and has its problems and needs to be organized and needs to be defended. And I guess that's sort of two values that we have to bring together, and that also will need attention for the future. I guess it's two big things on the agenda of European Mathematical Society, who will not be alone on that, but needs to be connected.
Actually, one issue we have almost touched, but maybe let me come to it, because I recently I've been confronted with this, and I'm sure you heard about this, some pressure which is exerted in some universities about really stopping having mathematics as a research domain, and wanted to more or less close their math departments because they wanted just to have some lectures giving in mathematics. And this is in some sense very much connected to the temptation by a number of politicians to say we must focus on the immediate issues, they are so pressing, and so I mean there's so much threat there that we have to put all our efforts in this and that. And therefore, if you're not doing climate change, you should not have a math department, you should have a climate change department. I personally don't believe in that, and not that all that I'm not serious about climate change. Actually, I'm wearing the pin for the Sustainable Development Goals always, because I think it's a major thing we need to think about all the time. But you know, how do mathematicians contribute to really knowledge? They contribute to knowledge because most of us received quite broad training. And we feel that in a sense, of course, there are plenty of parts of mathematics. We are not really very, we don't have personally a sophistical knowledge, but we know we can learn it. Because I think the way we have been trained, we know there is basically no piece of mathematics that we cannot access if we decide to access it. And this is connected to the fact that, in a sense, I don't know for you, but for me, if I'm asked what is my profession, I'm saying I'm a mathematician. And I don't think I can say I'm a climate changer or I don't know what, which I don't mean to, I'm not saying this by lack of respect for people who engage in this, but I think when you engage in this, you have to come up with your own identity. And of course, you need to get people with different identities to work together, to understand each other, and to see what part of your own knowledge that you can put at the disposal of others, which very often means that when people ask you questions, the first step is to translate the question into something you actually understand, and the same on the other side. So I think it's very, very important in these times where a lot of priorities are coming up and for good reasons, because they are really priorities. But the way you set up the training and you set up the research should not be so restrictive that in the end you just negate the necessity of having science developing for itself. Because I think it's only when you develop new knowledge that you get, you broaden your chances of solving problems. And very often you don't know from where the solution is going to come, which doesn't mean that having a sustained effort in some areas is not going to bring progress. It does bring progress, but sometimes the decisive progress, the breakthrough, is coming from completely another direction. And this happens only if the researchers have the freedom to do their research, and if they are trained broadly enough and with enough creativity, which means that in different departments, the same training is going to be different. It's not going to be one syllabus, which is the valid for all math departments in the world. That would be totally silly and stupid. You have to cultivate the originality in a good way, and but still always being open to other parts of your discipline and also to other disciplines.
So you're arguing in some sense for the usefulness of useless knowledge, to use that phrase by Flexner, who founded the Institute for Advanced Study, or for the importance of fundamental research, because without the fundamental research, we will never arrive at solutions and progress. That sort of brings us already into the second part of our interview. If we look at sort of what's the agenda of European Research Council and what's your perspective from that. But let me stay sort of perhaps for a last question for mathematics as a community and European Mathematical Society as a community organizer, so to speak. And do you think that communities come together? Do you think we are growing together? Are we, as mathematicians in Europe, are we on a good path? Or do you more see the dangers of that things fall apart and spread in so many directions that it's hard to keep people together for a joint society?
Well, it's difficult for me to say something definitive. I still believe, because of the functions I had, in particular when I was director of IHES, because although IHES has a reputation in some specific fields for the reason of the small number of permanent professors who are definitely people who contributed to mathematics in specific areas, but I was amazed of the variety of people we could attract. And from that point of view, as director, I also tried very much that we open up to other interactions than the traditional ones. And I think I was very pleased when I saw some of the permanent members who all of a sudden said, oh, by the way, I really interacted remarkably well. I remember one thing which I found fantastic, because a biologist who came to IHES, spent some time, and he said, he said, well, most of the time I spoke with Alain Kohn and Laurent Laforgue about Galois theory. I said, what, you're talking about Galois theory? He says, no, yes, because for my research in biology, what is fundamental is ambiguity. And the people who have been dealing with ambiguity in the most efficient way are actually mathematicians. And it's by understanding really in depth what Galois theory is that I really gained for my own work on in biology some knowledge on ambiguity. So of course you cannot predict this in a completely. So I think you have to create spaces where people feel comfortable to come forward and ask necessarily at the beginning stupid questions, but more and more less and less stupid questions, and in the end contribute to their field. So I think from that point of view, we need these open spaces, and we need the community to be open. But what I saw in particular in terms of the diversity of lectures which are offered here and there, and also the end, in my opinion, to a battle which in the 80s was quite furious about pure and applied mathematics, basically overcome. I think because I think on both sides we understood that, as I said, it was not a matter of identity. It was a matter of working together, identifying the right tools, identifying the right pertinent the concepts, and so on and so forth. And actually, the same happened with the computer science. For a number of years, mathematicians had the feeling, in France in particular, because all new positions for computer science were taken away from mathematics department. And it was a very important decisions to obtain that this should not be the case. There was a new field coming up, which of course needed people, needed position, and therefore we should just work with them, and rather than exclude them, just do the opposite, because they are coming up with great new challenges. They're also coming up with great new solutions, because they develop tools which are extremely important for mathematicians at the same time. So I think from the point of view of the community, what I've seen as an evolution has been, for me, a rather positive one. It does mean that there are not some places where these fights or these difficulties are not remaining. But I don't think altogether, I think as a community, we have been going a long way. And maybe my final point on this has to do also with the profile of people we train. It varies very much from one country to the other, what is the employment of people trained in mathematics. But I know for France at the moment, and I think Germany is not very different, more or less 1 out of 2 people who get PhDs, they don't stay in academia. And it's not a disaster at all. They are, to the opposite, they are ambassadors of the discipline in different worlds. Some of them create their companies, some of them work in large companies, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to. This is really something we need to accept. Of course, it means probably the training we offer has to be to take this into account, that the product, quote unquote, that we are producing with our students, they will find different positions in society, but still they will take these positions as mathematicians. And so this is something, so from that point of view, I think as a community, I rather feel that we handle the whole thing quite well. And from that point of view, the European Math Society has also helped to share different experiences, different level of developments. What was considered a threat somewhere was already overcome elsewhere. So you could learn from the others. So I think this level playing field was very important. And the EMS provided that on a number of issues.
I think that's a wonderful positive note to sort of end the first half of the interview on. I mean, immediately continue with these things and also your remarks about pure and applied mathematics and being inclusive with computer science. We are just reliving this in the next stage where everything is artificial intelligence, which we should have called statistics in the first place and considered a part of mathematics. For a little break to take, because this is strenuous, of course, I was wondering whether we would just invite Maria in and either ask her for this one question she wanted to ask all the time and to interfere, or on the other hand, she could ask you for these 1 or 2 biographical things that were not in the written thing and we should all know about. Maria, do you
You said that I had forgotten to say some things and you knew them, but I don't know what they were.
I don't know what they are either. What should we know about Jean-Pierre Bourguignon? That, I mean, there's these, you know, there's for also for graduate students, there's this thing of the true CV, where this concept where you include in your CV also one or two of your failures in your brilliant biography. Have you had any failures in there any time?
Sure, and certainly I have many failures. And no, maybe one thing which definitely at some point I would have liked, which actually didn't really happen, is I worked on several monographies, and actually only one has been published. And if I look at how it has been published, it means my co-authors did most of the work. So in the sense, I've not been very good at producing documents. One of my difficulties is that for me to write is very painful. And I'm a very slow writer. And as a result, well, it's true, I had some other responsibilities. So I was not just taking it easy on the beach or something like this, which, but it's true that this is something, actually, some people even came to me saying, well, you said you were working on this, but, and this didn't happen. And actually, one thing which I'm very pleased, it was finished, but it took a long time. But partly I was at that time president of the European Research Council, is, you know, these complete works of Eugenio Calabi, which has been published with Simon Donaldson and Chen Shushong. Chen Shushong was a direct student of Eugenio. And of course, Simon doesn't need a presentation. And then it took us really a long time to have it finished. Now it's published, it's available. Part of it was the difficulty for some printing houses to allow us to reprint, which actually some of the companies disappeared, but then the rights still existing. So very difficult to get the rights. So, and we should not have taken so long. Fortunately, Eugenio is more than 98 years old and still strong. So fortunately, we could finish and we could provide him with the copy of the complete works. So, but this has been frustrating for me because I had the feeling I was not putting enough energy into it. And Simon was in the same situation, and Shushong too. So, but nevertheless, I think this is one thing which have another, again, monography which would have existed, which is a reworked version in English of my lectures at École Polytechnique, which has been pending for almost 20 years. I thought I would be doing it last year, but then I was called back to ERC. So, so it was again difficult. So this is for sure something I really resented.
But if I may comment on that, I think that you are one of the most hardworking people I know in our community. So I don't think this is a failure, is that your days have 24 hours and weeks 7 days, and you couldn't do more.
Maria, writing is hard work, or is it easy for you?
No, it's difficult for me. I never wrote a book. And when I was offered to do that, I never accepted the idea because it was really too much. It's something I don't feel like doing. It will be a lot of work, yes.
But I mean, perhaps
and there are so many things to do, so it's not that you have time to do this and that. You choose what you want. And I think that Jean-Pierre also, you have chosen what you wanted to do in some sense.
Yeah, well, it's also a question of setting priorities. So you have to do that, and I also have a family life, so I think it's also something very important for me. So,
is that true that we choose what we want to do? I mean, did you choose? You wanted to always be ERC director, and that's why you did it, or is it just for responsibility, or is it you take the job and at some point you realize it may even be fun if you do it well?
Well, so you're moving to the second part of the interview in a sense. So, no, actually, the story is maybe an interesting one and maybe important for people to understand. Actually, I was associated with the first time people dreamed of having a European Research Council, which was I think the first time I heard about it was 1995. So it was during my time as president of the European Mathematical Society, the EMS. And at that time, one thing which people should understand is that the support given to research by the European Commission was limited by the treaties. And at that time, research was not a shared responsibility. So giving individual grants was forbidden. So it was very simple. So the only way the European Commission could support research was either to strengthen the cohesion, so therefore encouragement for networks, or really wealth creation, which meant close collaboration between industry and academia. But the idea of supporting individual grants was just excluded. So people said, no, we need to progress on that. And it took, if you count, the ERC was created in 2007, 12 years to do that. In the meantime, I discussed the issue with a number of people. In particular, somebody with whom I discussed it extensively was Mariano Gago, who was at the time the Minister for Science and Technology in Portugal. And Mariano was really a visionary. And it's not a random coincidence that several statements at European level on research actually are called Lisbon, are referred to Lisbon. So, and even the treaty where this was made possible was the Lisbon Treaty. And I must say, we are presently in the last days of a Portuguese presidency, and I'm very fortunate to be able to work very closely with Manuel Heitor, who is the minister and who was in the team of Mariano Gago. So I think it still continues, if you want. So in a sense, I couldn't monitor this, and many people believe that we would never make it. But finally, it happened, and the key meeting, I think, was in 2005. And actually, a person who played a very key role to this, because it's very interesting. At that time, the countries which were for it were the smaller countries, but the big countries, they were not for it. Germany was against, and France was not very decisive, and UK was a priori against. And there is a very critical meeting in Dublin, and Lord Sainsbury was the minister at that time. And he, of course, had a speech prepared for the meeting. And the speech was saying that UK will be against. But then he read the speech and said, why should I say that? And he said the opposite. And you see, and of course, Lord Sainsbury was not a scientist. He was very curious about science, but he was not a scientist. But then reading the speech, he just said, no, why should we say that? And so finally, the ERC came into existence, 2007. And then I had the privilege of being offered the possibility of becoming the first chair of the panel for starting grants for ERC. And this experience has been absolutely fantastic. The panel was great. All the people there were just convinced we were doing something exceptional. They wanted to learn about things. There was no prima donna, just people were constructive. They wanted to learn from each other. So I kept from this experience a very positive memory. Even if, because, you know, mathematicians tend to be not very ready for compromise, had some very serious fights with the administration because we refused to do some things they wanted us to do. For example, one of the persons claimed you should not know any of the people you fund. But, you know, if you're exposed, at that time I was director of IHES, I mean, you see passing through the institute and meetings and so on, all the good young people. So of course I knew basically all of them, and but doesn't mean because you know people that you are going to favor them or I don't know what. But for some people it was unthinkable that you should only award grants to people we don't know. Of course, it has to do with the size of the community, its connectivity, and so on. So this was my first experience with ERC. And then at some point, actually, again, the EMS plays a key role because came the change of structure where in the Horizon 2020, for the first time, there would be an ERC president. Before that, the Scientific Council elected its president. But the president was not an employee of the commission. But then it was decided, and there was a secretary general who was an employee of the commission. and of course working with the president, but that was different. So they decided to merge the two positions and to create the position of an ERC president. And then at some point, actually, maybe I should not name the person, but if you look at who was the president of EMS at that time, calls me and say, we want you to apply for the job. And actually it came at the moment where I had finished being I was about to finish it was the spring of 2013. I was about to finish being the director of IHES, and then had planned, because I wanted to leave the space for my successor, I had planned to be for a full year away, and even in a very organized way, spending 3 months at 4 different places, and each time taking one of my grandchildren with me. At that time, I had 4 grandchildren. So it was already planned. And well, it was a serious issue. So I said, no, if you are the only one to propose my name, I will not submit my candidacy, because at that time you were not a candidate. You just had to send your CV to show that you were willing to serve. And then, well, some other structures came to me saying, well, you should consider submitting. So finally I submitted. But in a sense, I didn't think I had any chance. And I'm a mathematician, so I'm not, in a sense, in the center of science or anything. And so I was not, of course, I would have been very offended if I had not been in the people who were interviewed, which were, at that time, I think there were 30 candidates. So I hoped I would be at least in the 10. And then a bit to my surprise, I was not in the 10, but I was chosen. So then I had to change my plan, which fortunately I learned early enough, which was in July, even if the announcement happened only in December. But in July, I was told that I would be the next president. And so I had to rearrange my trips. And so I still went to Stanford for 3 months. I took two grandchildren, not one. And of course, the other 2 are still missing this opportunity of spending 3 months with their grandparents abroad. I hope I can restore that soon, but we shall see. Anyway, so, and then I became the president of the ERC. And it was immediately, one thing I knew was the extremely high quality of the staff, which of course was something I could verify, and also the very high quality of the evaluators. And also the scientific council was really great. And of course, in a sense, was reasonably easy because they had given their okay to my nomination. It's not the scientific council which chooses. The scientific council only gives whether the people submitted are acceptable or not. So I knew I was at least acceptable, and therefore. And then these were these extraordinary 6 years, traveling Europe, traveling the world, meeting many scientists of different disciplines, in particular young ones, which was an extraordinary experience and very, well, very intensive, but extremely good. But then also big fights, because, for example, one fight, which was a major one, was when all of a sudden there was the so-called Juncker plan, which was about starting some kind of a central investment at European level, for which money was supposed to be taken away from the Horizon 2020 program, in particular from the ERC, and also from the Marie Curie actions. And of course, we resented that very much because we knew this money taken away would never come back. And therefore, it was a major fight. So we organized ourselves, which meant pressing a number of scientists to write articles, having a number of Nobel Prizes or Fields medalists to really write or even come. We managed to organize the lunch with Mr. Juncker and a number of Nobel Prize winners. And of course, after some times, it was very interesting because the first reaction of a commissioner when I said we want this to change, he said, no, we cannot change anything. So it was a serious fight, but we won it. And so the ERC was not taxed. So we saved 220 million. And also the Marie Curie actions were not taxed either. So I think we helped everybody. But of course, it was the achievement of the scientific community. It was when we knew that, because some people told me, if you reach more than 150 articles in the press, then you have a chance. And there were something like 180 articles in the press. But that was, of course, didn't come easily. We had to mobilize many people from many different countries and so on and so forth. So we made it. So that was a big fight. But I think it was very interesting because it showed that if it organizes itself properly, the scientific community can achieve something at political level. Of course, the amount of money we moved was not so huge. It was 500 million. We could have hoped for more, but at least we achieved that. So this was one of the good memory, if you ask me about good memories. And it's also why when I accepted to come back as president and interim last July, was in the same spirit, because the vice president convinced me there will be in the fall a major fight for the budget. We cannot fight this by ourselves because we are too busy. I mean, all these people had the full-time jobs. And so one of the reasons why I accepted, said, okay, let's do another one. and well, it was not, we hoped to achieve more, but at least we saved 1 billion for ERC. Well, could have been better, but that's what we achieved. And again, when I say really we, it's not me, it's just the whole community, and the parliament has been fantastic. A number of people in parliament have been great. I must say, much less from governments, except a few.
But that means they hired you as a fighter, not as a mathematician for this job, certainly the second time.
Well, you see, there is one thing I learned about the image that people have of mathematicians. In a sense, since people know we don't need large infrastructures, that we are organized in a discipline where really we are not publishing so much, I think the image of a mathematician is still pretty good altogether. And in particular, in my case, I had the advantage of really having, just because of the functions I had before, of really having contacts everywhere in the world. And I know this is something which played a very key role for me in getting the attention of the commissioner, at that time, Carlos Moedas from Portugal. And of course, since my relation to Portugal was a bit special, it was maybe easier. But the fact that I had traveled a lot to China, a lot to Japan, in the US, I could talk to the director of the NSF on a personal basis, things like this, which I could do because in my previous function, IHES was receiving money from NSF. And also we had set up funds for Japanese to travel to IHES and so on. So part of my previous experience was fully international. And I know that for some people, well, they consider this as an asset. And I think it is an asset because I could keep repeating at European level, look at what's happening in Asia. Don't think only about China. Think about Japan, think about Singapore, think about South Korea. And because I had this exposure, of course, helps because it gives you can show, and when you travel and you have your commissioner with you, and you can introduce him to people you know personally in Japan or in China, of course, makes a difference. And so these are the ways, thanks to the remarkable connectivity of the math community, I think you can achieve.
You refer to yourself as a candidate for ERC, and you said mathematics is not in the center of science. Do you want to repeat that sentence? Would you still view that now, or where do you see mathematics in science?
No, but okay, so let me explain what I mean by this. For many people, I mean, in particular, people who are doing policy, you look at sciences and how much they cost. And of course, mathematics is not costing a huge amount of money. Of course, we know what is critical for mathematics is supporting mathematicians. And of course, we need some infrastructure. I'm not saying we don't need any infrastructure, but if you look at the cost of the infrastructures in mathematics and in other fields, much smaller. But now, if you're talking strictly about science, forgetting about the money side or the policy side, of course, I think it has never been like this, that mathematics is so central to so many different disciplines. And this is something that mathematicians have to recognize and have to accept and have to be ready for, which means being open, being really discussing with many different people. So I think this is, from that point of view, if you now talking strictly about science, this is an extraordinary moment for mathematics. In particular, the new transformation of artificial intelligence, which, as you know, we still call it with the same name, although the paradigm has been changed at least 2 times, fundamental paradigm. And so I think the role of mathematics has grown into it, and very substantially. And still at the moment, it's one of the extraordinary frontiers for mathematics. And therefore, from that point of view, when I was saying that mathematics was not central, I was talking in terms of, you see, the view of policymakers and people who have to reserve budgets and so on, where mathematics is, in a sense, what I tend to say is that you can please mathematicians without hardly anybody noticing it. Because indeed, the amount of money you need to mobilize is not so big, except for positions. We need positions. And in particular, we need positions for young people, because we trust in young people. And so this is something which very often is an argument which is very often difficult to make, because mathematicians really want to hire people and not just give them a 1-year stipendium. We know it's not going to work. And so this is really what I meant. So I didn't mean at all that mathematics is marginal. It's just the opposite. At the moment, it's really one of the fields, one of the disciplines which really can interact and contribute and gain from contacts with basically every other disciplines.
We are getting closely to the end. Now, I would want to ask you 2 questions just which come in from the chat, from our audience, perhaps shorter answers, and then I will do something else to sort of really end it. First question comes from someone called Tommaso, who asks, we all, and young people in particular, are under several pressures, work on trendy topics, publish constantly. For this pressure, do you have any advice, suggestion, comment, how to deal with that?
No, I don't have. You see, it's very unfortunate, and as professional mathematicians, we have to fight against that as much as we could. I know for myself that I had the fantastic privilege to be hired. I was 21, and I could look at hard problems because I had the job. The job was not very well paid, but still I had I was a father. I was 23, but I could do that because I had the job. So I think we collectively need to resist to this, and really, because we know it's going to affect the quality, and it makes the life of people impossible. So I think we should not accept that. We should fight this by all means.
There's a very current discussion in German politics right now about putting everybody on permanent positions in science, and of course that doesn't work either. But so for the Germans in the audience, that's what we read in the paper today and yesterday and the day before. Different question from Monsieur Lamboni, who asked about the reviewers for also ERC. But I would ask the question a bit much larger. Have you seen the whole review system that we also have for papers, but also for ERC grants and all this? When reviewers are not paid, they are hard to get. We very much appreciate if we get good work. Is the system broken? Does that work? Is that something we have to rely on, something we can improve?
Well, there are 2 sides to this. One side, in the case of ERC, we do pay our reviewers because the amount of work we ask for them is really very substantial. But you don't get rich this way, I can tell you, by far. But still, we do cover their expenses decently. So, but we really mobilize them for full weeks. So I think could not be just at one. Of course, we don't pay the remote referees, which is typically one project they have to review. And the reason why we don't pay them, it's also as soon as we start to have a contract, it's administratively such a mess and so complicated that we don't do it. No, I said I want to look at it from the other side. I think as scientists, reviewing papers is part of our training. We need to teach our own students that this is a very important job for them. Of course, it's a very important job for the paper they are reviewing, but it's also an extremely good way of learning new material, of understanding also that some people could make mistakes, that people could actually miss some information and so on. So I think being in the position of a reviewer is one of the roles that we have to teach our students to accept. And I won't tell you which article it is, but for one article, which was 400 pages long, it took me a full year to review it. And I was basically only doing that. Of course, the paper was significant. I would not have spent that much time for this, and I learned a huge amount. And of course, from this. So I think we also have to view the review process of contributing to making decisions, but at the same time as a learning process, which is extremely important to become an accomplished scientist. So I think in terms of why you are not rewarded for that, part of it is because you're actually gaining something from that. Of course, it should not be abused, because of course, if it's some work, it's okay, and you can consider it's your professional duty. Of course, when it becomes huge, then you should get some reward. Actually, for this long review, I told you I didn't get even a copy of the article in the end. Of course, I bought one myself because my own copy was so much commented that it was not good.
Last question from the audience. Betul Tanbay, who we know, asks, what's your opinion on Horizon Europe, and what's your opinion on the horizon of Europe?
Well, on Horizon Europe, you know, it's a program which has many components. As any new program which has a slightly new structure, you have to see how the various components are going to work together. 2 comments for ERC. The ERC is developing a very good collaboration with the EIC, the European Innovation Council. We don't see it as an enemy. We want to collaborate in a positive way. Each one has its own logic, its own value, and that's it. But concerning the Horizon of Europe, I think I would encourage everybody to contribute to the Conference on the Future of Europe, which for the moment, the main concern we have, and this conference should end next spring in 2022, is that for the moment, research innovation is not given the right place. And actually, one of the actions I've been spending a huge amount of time in recent weeks is really to call the attention of people that it cannot be like this. We cannot discuss the future of Europe without really understanding better how we can have Europe be present, active, recognized, and at the forefront of research innovation.
Excellent. Let's go for that. Let me end this with asking you, giving you 3 sentences, and you will just answer with true or false. The first one says, money alone does not make unhappy.
False.
False. Mathematics is much more difficult than what you do now.
Yes.
And the golden rule, whoever makes the rule makes the gold.
Sorry, the golden rule?
And the golden rule says that whoever makes the rules gets the gold.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Jean-Pierre, it was wonderful to have you here on stage. I very much enjoyed this conversation. Let me say thank you on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, Günther.
I would like to thank both of you, Günther and Jean-Pierre, for this wonderful conversation. I think it was a very beautiful manner to end the Congress. I also thank all the participants who were listening to your conversation. And now I invite all of you to join the closing ceremony of the 8th ECM that will take place in 5 minutes. Thank you very much to everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
It was great having you.